Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. And welcome to our Business Resiliency series, Navigating COVID-19. Today, we are going to be focusing on accessing government resources, an urgent priority for many businesses right now. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to make sure that our members and the broader business community can find answers to their most pressing questions. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions and help companies navigate the next step. We encourage you to take part in this discussion. You can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. And we're also using Slido for today's discussion to allow you to submit questions. You can do this in your internet browser or on your phone. Go to slido.com. And as you can see on the screen, you need to enter the code GVBOT-GovFund. Before we start, and especially in these challenging times, we want to thank our long-standing sponsors called our pillar partners. They include TELUS, YVR, CN, BCIT, and Air Canada. We are very grateful for the support of these 5 organizations whose annual partnerships and commitments help enable the work of the Board of Trade. Thank you as well to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Today, we are joined by Julien Lassonde, National Incentives Leader Partner from PwC Canada. And Julien is going to begin with a presentation, and then we will be joined by Jason Cheng, Partner of Scientific Research and Experimental Development and Tax Incentives, and Daniel Lemaire, Senior Manager of Tax Services and Government Incentives, who will join us for a Q&A. First, though, over to Julien, who is a partner in charge of the tax credits and government incentives practice for the province of Quebec. Julien, I'm going to let you kick things off first, and then we'll get to some questions from our viewers, and also we'll bring in Jason and Daniel then. Over to you.
Thank you, Bridget, and thank you to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade for having us today in this webinar on the new financial programs that have been put in place in response to the COVID-19 crisis. As you are all aware, we are currently experiencing an unprecedented situation from both an economic and public health point of view. I hope that all you and your families are doing well. Each day brings its shares of news, its shares of announcements, its share of new programs announced by different levels of government. We understand that it creates uncertainty, and it's hard to see clearly in this context, especially when you have to juggle with daily family routines on top of it, and as it's case in my home. So don't be surprised if you see a child running up behind my presentation. But over the past few days, just so you know, my colleagues and I have been in many conversations with many of our clients who are facing challenges that have been never experienced before. Our goal is to support Canadian companies to enable them to ride the wave, to equip them, to guide them, but above all, to listen to them. In this context, change the slide, please. In this context, we have developed a tool, the COVID-19 Navigator, which is available on our website. This tool can help you to self-assess and obtain your diagnosis of the potential impact of the COVID-19 on your business and assess your readiness to react. Through the discussions we've had with different businesses, entrepreneurs, and institutional investors, we were able to get a fairly accurate picture of the challenges faced by organizations. One thing is certain, we understand that you want to be reassured, but above all, you want to be equipped with the right tools you need to get through the crisis and come out of it stronger. Next slide, please. The main areas of challenges that emerged from these conversations with our clients were 6 priority areas: the workforce, crisis management, operations and supply chain, financial information, taxes, duty and trade, financial planning and analysis. All are important challenges to be taken up. With our global PwC network, we are privileged to work closely with organizations around the world to help them prepare for and respond to all kinds of crises. Our expertise has been enhanced by working with the business, governments, legislators, NGOs, international organizations in the context of outbreaks that have occurred during the recent decades, such as Ebola, SARS, and avian influenza. Next slide, please. These prior experience allows us to very quickly improve our knowledge of the COVID-19 crisis. We propose a comprehensive approach to crisis management consisting of 3 phases: mobilize, stabilize, and strategize. Companies that emerge the strongest from a crisis will be those that can move quickly through each of these phases. The intervention framework proposes an approach adapted to the different waves you're facing. In mobilization phase, we aim to focus at our people, their security, and implement a business continuity plan. It's at this point that you will need to deploy your communication strategy. And adopting a calm, unifying leadership is clearly key to reassuring your employees who see their daily lives being disrupted at the moment. The second step, stabilization, will allow you to examine the short, medium, and long-term impact of the crisis on your customer and suppliers. This is what will allow you to make informed decisions. And finally, the strategy development phase is the one that will allow you to stand out. How will you make your company even more resilient and agile in times of uncertainty? The idea is not just to get to the status quo, but to make your company better than it was before. Next slide, please. Now, let's get down to our today's topic, the financial assistance program that have been put in place by the provincial and federal governments. In short, what are the solutions for generating cash? Next slide, please. Governments in many countries have responded very quickly to announce emergency tax programs, incentives to support struggling businesses and their employees. I am fortunate to work closely with my colleagues who are leaders in the incentive programs, the incentive practices of the other countries around the globe, and we decided to centralize the information on all programs that have a specific COVID-19 crisis aspect. And there are officially programs in 104 countries this morning, and all of this was set up in 2 weeks. It's unprecedented, quite impressive. In Canada, next slide, please. We are also relatively fortunate to have governments that have responded so quickly. All levels of governments, federal, provincial, municipal, large cities, and even smaller municipalities, such as Louisville, for example, where our colleague and co-presenter Danielle is currently isolated. Each level of government, in fact, has its own list of measures trying to meet various objectives to help the cause. So we find ourselves inundated, faced with the panoply of programs that seems to address a number of different problems without really having anything in common. It addresses different type of industries, different type of problems, different types of financial vehicles. Well, for example, we have loans, grants, deferred payments, employment measure, etc. How to navigate in this jungle of incentives that have been introduced. In fact, we can see that they are grouped into families of programs, each with their own vocation, have a common characteristics, and are managed differently over time. I'm going to introduce you to the main families in question here so that we can just drill down afterward. First, the labor-related programs. Helping employees who are out of work downsize due to the crisis. These programs are quite important, and here are a few important ones. Of course, the temporary wage subsidy for small businesses. This subsidy is up to 75% of the portion of earnings up to $78,700, equating to a benefit of $847 per week. All businesses are eligible. If the sales, of course, decrease 30% due to the COVID-19. No cap on the number of employees. Another important measure, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, taxable benefit of $2,000 a month for up to 4 months for workers, small business owners, and entrepreneurs who have not received paychecks as a result of COVID-19. It's also important to note the work sharing program, which allows employers to schedule weeks for their employees who can then access EI for an income supplement. The maximum duration of the program has also been extended from 38 weeks to 76 weeks. So for an employee, a part of his income would be provided by the company for the part-time work he have to do, and the other part would be eligible to employment insurance. Again, family, the bridging loans and deferrals, which are programs that provide very short-term cash flow solutions with loans, is certainly one of the most important components, with significant amount of assistance granted by the government, with tools such as bridges, deferred taxes, moratoriums, and capital and/or interest on payments, loan guarantees with private government banks, BDC, EDC mainly, of course. And here it's clearly there's something immediate actions to be taken. This is what provides the oxygen in the short term, so quite important one. And then the other incentives, which are basically enhancement of the standard government funding programs. Here we will find existing programs in forms of grants, tax credits, and special loans also that are all modified with the COVID-19 components for projects that contribute directly or indirectly to the crisis management. This category includes also dedicated COVID programs, which are fewer in numbers, but which target elements, projects that provide direct solutions to the crisis, for example. And then we should not also forget, we don't list here all the standard programs unmodified for COVID, but which can also be very, very useful to provide short-term, medium-term cash flow sources. We have in Canada a very large number of existing incentives that have been put in place for several years. In fact, we have an internal database that allows us to identify and list the existing federal, provincial, and municipal incentives, and there are several thousand of them. Of course, we must not forget them. And for those who have the capacity to do so, it's clearly a good time to invest and to apply to these grant programs. There is certainly less competition when applying to the programs. The processing time is often shortened, and there is more willingness on the part of the government to help companies to invest. And now I will turn it on to Danielle to get into the details.
Thank you, Julien. We've been flooded with information for the last 2 weeks. There were a lot of announcements, a lot of new measures that were put in place. As Julien mentioned, there are three main categories in which you can classify those announcements and those new measures. There are other that are also applicable that were announced that are less that are not necessarily new measures, but are elements that will help give and provide cash flow for Canadian companies. So what we tried to do here, before we get to the question period, what we tried to do here is to provide you with some kind of a tool that will help you plan your actions for the next few months, the next few weeks or few months. We tried to classify all the announcements that were made that are significant for cash flow issues, for example, on the cash flow side, or on the long-term positioning for the rebound that will come someday. We don't see it immediately. We don't know exactly when it will come, but there will be a rebound of the economy, and you have to think and be prepared for when that time will come. So what you have here is some kind of a tool where the higher you are on the sorry, the higher and on the left you are, the more value and the more immediate the measures are, and the more higher value they have. If you go on the lower part of if you go in the lower part, it's with a lower value. It's not necessarily some are more immediate, some are more on the long term. So if we go to the next slide, we'll go very, very fast through all these four sections. So the first thing you should think, there were a lot of deferrals that were announced, so that's something you could take advantage of. We're talking about installment or payment of taxes until September 1st. That's something that should be considered. Deferral of PSTs and PST remittals in BC, so that's something that you should take advantage of. You also have deferral of utility payments. You should also think at some other options that you have, which may be the transfer of tax installments that were made for income tax that could be used probably for other accounts, GST accounts, BST accounts, or payroll taxes, for example. That's something that's a strategy that could be used to make sure that you maximize the cash to which every business has access. And there are other financing tools that were put in place. Julien mentioned them during his part of the presentation. Special help to mobilize industry to address the situation and try to address the pandemic and find solutions to shorten and to eliminate the virus. And anyways, everything that you have which is related to the COVID-19 situation will be prioritized in different programs that are available at the federal level. And you will also be prioritized if you apply to some kind of innovation program that is already in place, but if you have a project that will address the situation also. So those are the most immediate actions that you could, and measures and ideas that you can take advantage of. Next slide, please. With a lower value, well, we're going to have something that's going to be discussed, the temporary wage subsidy for small business, which is a program or a measure that evolves rapidly, and we don't know if we still have two measures of that kind, but that's something we're going to get back to in a couple of minutes in the question period, I think. And the payment deferrals, many payment deferrals were announced, so that's something that should be looked at for immediate action, maybe with less value, but that are immediately available for all the businesses in Canada. And some rent deferral also measures were announced, so that's something also that should be considered. Next slide, please. Longer term, continue with the applications that were already made or apply to existing programs that will remain probably after the crisis, and that will be there when there will be the rebound, in order to be well positioned when the market will get back on track. And some strategic investment that will help for the rebound should be considered also, and should not be necessarily left over during that period, because that's going to be something that's going to be important to take advantage of the rebound after the crisis. Next slide, please. And on long term, lower value, but these are options. Debt refinancing will be an option, and some different tax planning that can be available. If you are a private corporation, you could consider refreezing. You could consider also taking that accelerate the use of some losses that were incurred in last years, and there are many other tax ideas that could be that you could take advantage of. So next slide. We provided you with some information about the new tax credit, the new credit that will be investment credit that will be available through BDC. So that's something you can look at if you want more details. But I think that would be the end of this part of the presentation, Bridget. And I think we can go to, well, on that, Julien, do you have any other thing that you would like to address before we end the slide deck on the next one?
No, I think we're good, and we had already quite a
yeah. I think we went over our time.
Not at all. Very comprehensive overview. Thank you very much to Julien and to Daniel. I'm going to bring in Jason Cheng here as well. And I think one of the most pressing priorities for many businesses is understanding more fully about the 75% wage subsidy, and understanding that Finance Minister Morneau just made an announcement within the last hour or so to give a few more details. There still are a lot more details to be worked out. But let's start with that, and Jason, I'll get you to address it, because it does seem that the 10% wage subsidy that was first announced does remain in place. That is a separate program. I've just been looking at my notes and trying to read very quickly as you were doing your presentation, everybody. But it looks like that one does stay intact. But let's focus maybe on the 75% wage subsidy, because there are a lot of businesses who are going to be applying for that. And start maybe with that 30% reduction in revenue. How do businesses have to show that?
Yeah. So this afternoon or this morning, depending on which time zone you're in, the government did come out with some more details on how that 30% is determined. they're going to be looking at the 3 months, the same 3 months from last year as your base, and that's going to be your comparison to whether your revenues dropped 30% or not. So that'd be March, April, and May. And if your revenues have dropped 30% in those 3 months compared to 2019, you should qualify.
And how are businesses going to be able to apply for this? I was noting in some of the remarks from the minister that some of these funds are going to take some time to get to businesses, which is a bit of a concern given it is April 1st and many businesses have bills that are due today, including rent. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it is going to take some time. So how do businesses apply to access this funding?
Okay, again, that was just announced today too. So there's going to be a separate CRA online application page that's going to be set up. There'll be a portal where you can apply, and according to the government, once it's up and running, they're thinking it should be up and running by next Monday. What the application should be turned around within a week. So and then I think you need to on a monthly basis renew your application. So that's kind of still some details are unclear, but that's kind of what has been announced this morning.
So to be able to demonstrate that 30% revenue drop year over year, so we apply for March and then April and then May, is that correct?
Yes, correct. And I think it's at this point it's going to be on you're gonna on an honor system. The government has come out and said that they will review these things, and if they catch you applying for this when you shouldn't be applying for it, there's going to be big penalties.
Okay, and since there's three of you here to answer questions, I'll play a little bit maybe of air traffic control here, but I want to move on to the Business Credit Availability Program, which is that $40,000 loan that businesses can apply for. Maybe talk about some of the criteria around that. Are all businesses eligible, and does that money need to be used for something in particular? In speaking to many of our members in the business community, facing problems around having to pay their rent or their lease payments, they are wondering whether those funds can be accessed to do that. And so maybe this is something that Daniel can speak to.
Yeah. So well, just to make sure, because there were so many announcements that you're talking about the Canada Emergency Business Account announcement. So this is a program that will provide up to, that's the right one, Bridget, right?
Yes, sorry, the $40,000 loan. Yes. Okay,
so well, the loans can go to a higher level than $40,000, but the part that will be interest free is for the first $40,000, because the goal of the program is to it will provide something like $25 billion that will for financial institutions, so they can provide interest-free loans to small business. So that's the basic of the program. So it will be guaranteed by the government until the $40,000 limit, and it's aimed for small businesses and non-profit organizations. So at this point, I haven't seen I haven't seen all the details of the program to what is a small business, but I guess it's going to be based on the same the usual standard, which is if the taxable capital used in Canada is less than $15 million, probably. Okay, so that's probably, Jason, I don't know if you have more input on this one, but that's probably the threshold that will be used.
Yeah, I'm probably on the same page with you on that. Definition hasn't been released yet, but if it's similar to the previous definitions, it would be, you have to be a Canadian controlled private corporation.
Yeah.
Eligible to claim the small business deduction, which would mean that you would have had to have a prior year taxable capital of less than 15 million. Yeah. And also, I think there may be a threshold on the taxable income that you would have received in the prior year as well. That's usually 500,000.
Yeah, and there's also a criteria that is based on the on your payroll for 2019, which is your payroll has to be between $50,000 and $1 million total payroll for 2019. So that's, but we'll probably get more details on that measure in time. There's a 25% loan forgiveness possible, so it's up to $10,000 of the loan that can be forgiven if the whole if the other 75% of the loan is repaid on or before December 31st, 2022. So that's you have to repay. And but the main it will be provided through the regular financial institutions of the businesses. So that's where I know that some application form, some financial institutions started providing application form that can be used for to apply for the loan. Not all of them has done it at the moment, but we know it's coming. It's starting to coming out. So we're starting to see that. Just regarding the costs that are covered, what we know at the moment is that it's going to be dedicated to paying operating costs that you are not able to defer as a result of COVID-19. What does that mean? For example, you can have measures that will allow you to defer your rent. Probably those expenses will not be able. You will not be able to use that amount to cover that kind of cost. But that's something that will have to be looked at a little bit deeper once the criteria come out. And we had a question about who will be monitoring this program. For the moment, I guess that it will be up to financial institutions to do some reporting about what is done and what is.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the just to add to that, I know a lot of the institutions, the financial institutions, if you ask them, they probably don't have all the details right now yet either. But I did see a news article today saying that CIBC has started rolling out this program to their customers, and if you do, no matter which bank or financial institution you bank with, they'll have the details eventually, and they'll start rolling it out pretty soon. I think the earliest for applications is next Monday as well.
And recognizing this crisis has really been quite swift, and it was about 2 weeks ago or so for many businesses where they were fully impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. So government has been quite quick to offer a lot of programs and measures, and so details are still being worked out. But for business trying to navigate, just looking at the slides of information that you had, and for businesses trying to navigate which program might be a best fit for their organization, how do they evaluate that and make that determination whether they should apply for a 75% wage subsidy, or maybe it's the work share program? What would be your advice on that? And maybe Jason, you could speak to that to start.
Well, as far as we know, there's no criteria that says you can't apply for all of them. So you apply for as many as you can. Go for the bigger value ones first. So in this case, you definitely would go for the 75% wage subsidy. You go for the $40,000 loan, interest-free loan, and then if you're a worker, there's the $2,000 per month UEI benefit. That one is probably more beneficial than for most people than collecting regular EI. So I would go for that one first, then collect regular EI afterwards, after the 4 month period's over.
And recognizing that a lot of businesses in Greater Vancouver are small businesses, and for many they might be self-employed, or they might have 1 or 2 employees. So would these kinds of measures or programs make sense for those businesses?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the $40,000 loan one for sure. That helps every company quite immensely. With the small businesses, and then the wage subsidy. 75% of anyone's wage being paid by the government is still a pretty good deal. You do have to pay that 25% if you're able to. That's what Trudeau has come out and said. So it is a great benefit. It keeps Canadians employed, which is his goal, and it helps spur the economy.
And I think that's what's important about the 75% wage subsidy, is that it does apply to small, medium, and large businesses, where that 10% subsidy that was announced first, that really was for smaller organizations. Maybe what we'll do is move to some of the Slido questions now, and get a feel for what people out there would like to ask. So we'll just wait for that slide to come up in just a second. And right away, right at the top there, we've had a number of people vote this one to the top. So again, businesses can apply for more than one financial assistance program, but how do they do that? Do they go through the CRA portal? Is that the best way to do this?
Depending on the program, so as Daniel mentioned, the $40,000 loan is administered by the banks. Most of the other programs appear to be administered by the CRA, so you would have to go through their portal and then apply through their online system.
And you know,
And
just
maybe,
sorry, go ahead, Daniel. Or Julien,
no,
go
it's
ahead.
Julien, but maybe regarding the grants, you can also apply to some of them. And I would say that unless there are any specific restrictions, and yes, there are, but unless there are restrictions, you can apply to different programs at the same time. Depending, of course, of the programs, there are impact one on the other, and you should take into account the calculation when you calculate the stacking of these programs. But as we've mentioned earlier, some of the measures are short-term and others are more long-term. So you should put in place a strategy to take advantage of as many measures, programs, tax credits as possible in the long run in order to at least be prepared to schedule them in time and be ready for rebounding.
And maybe, Julien, you could just pick up on that, and then we'll come back to this 30% reduction because there's a couple of questions on that. But for the longer term measures, I mean, I was interested to see how you had the immediate impact, and then you had some of those that were maybe higher value but longer term. So what would be some of those if people are looking beyond the next 30, 60, 90 days?
Maybe Danielle, would you cover this one?
Well, there are in the longer term, well, I'll also add medium term. Just there's one thing that I forgot to mention in the part of the presentation, but that even in the shorter term, all the tax credits that are already available should be taken advantage of. Okay, so if you have a claim already, for example, in audit, you should there's something that should be there's something you should a CRA should be contacted to see what can be done to get those tax credits out as fast as possible. You should also try to file your claims as fast as possible.
And then, Daniel, you're talking about SR&ED, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about SR&ED. Talking about
okay, just want to make sure everybody knows we're talking
yeah,
about SR&ED.
sorry. Good thing, Jason. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so yeah, I'm talking about SR&ED tax credit. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So, and if you think you have an application, you're going to file a claim, file it as soon as possible. Okay, just to make sure that that's a good way to get cash very fast. But you have all those other subsidies that are available that you can apply to, that you should apply immediately to in order to get it when the situation will, because you won't get the approval very fast. I'm talking about the IRAP program, for example, which is the Industrial Research Assistance Program that can be applied to for once again, it's going to be applicable to R&D activities, but you should apply to this right now. You should take advantage also of all the super clusters that were financed. They still have their money. They're still out there looking for application so that's something you should look at. This is not for the very short term unless you're addressing the COVID-19 situation, because there has been a prioritization of those projects but if you have a project that doesn't necessarily fit in, you still should apply in order to make sure that you get the funds once in the due process of so there are many tools in Canada that are available, many financing tools that are basically or R&D oriented or innovation oriented. You should get prepared immediately to take advantage of that, and all those investments should not be stopped.
Okay, that's great insight. And I think I would also just pass on to viewers that if you haven't set up an online account on the CRA website, to do that as soon as possible, even though applications don't open for some of these programs until April 6th. The system is very busy, and as soon as you can get that account, or that your account rather set up, the better off you are for sure.
I'd like to also add, you also need to add your direct deposit information. So just make sure that's all kind of ready to go. Once you apply, you'll get your deposit within 5 days, hopefully.
Absolutely. I want to just go back to go ahead.
Yeah, because it's communicating with CRA will be tough. Okay, I understand that you will be able, probably, if for those who have to deal with CRA, we weren't able to use emails to communicate with CRA, but I understand that they may be open to using emails, but it's not the best way to communicate with them. So yes, setting up your account is a very good thing to do very fast. Yeah.
Great. I want to go back now to the 30% revenue reduction, because right now what CRA is asking for, what the government is asking for, is to see a 30% reduction year over year. So March of 2020 to 2019, April, May, et cetera, month by month. But what about those companies that are either in startup mode, and so they wouldn't be able to show that, or perhaps, you know, just because of the way that they calculate revenue? So how are they going to be able to access these funds if they're in that situation?
Jason, I don't know if you, I will have more detail at the end of the day
today. That's a good question. Yeah, the government hasn't come out with any real details on that particular that situation. You know, I'm gonna venture to guess that if you did not have any revenues last year and you have revenues this year, you know, you may not be able. It's hard for you to prove that you actually had a decrease. You know, unless they come out more guidelines. I would say at this point you may not qualify based on what I'm reading.
And I think that's important for people to note, that the guidelines, you know, the 75% wage subsidy was only announced a couple of days ago. And then even when the finance minister was making some of the announcements today around the guidelines, it was clear that there are more guidelines coming. So, I mean, recognizing this is a program in the making, as companies come forward, like startups or other companies that might calculate their revenue, and not over a year basis, but maybe where they're seeing it trickling in, I think that's where the government has the opportunity to respond to business. I'm going to go to the top of the Slido deck here. And so a question here is that around long-term contractors instead of employees. So are there funds available to keep these contractors on? Jason, maybe I'll hand that off to you to start if you like.
Yeah, based on what I've seen so far, no, there's nothing really specifically targeted towards contractors. There is that $40,000 business loan that you can take out. That should help with those expenses. But in terms of actual like a wage subsidy, the 75% wage subsidy, there's nothing similar for contractors.
And I'm not sure which one of you can speak to this, but there's a question that has come in as well around business owners who are temporary residents. And this person is saying that some of the financial institutions, maybe they're having some challenges in dealing with them. So does it make a difference if it's a temporary resident and they're a business owner? Have we heard any guidelines around that?
Jason, you are it's specifically indicated that some of these measures are applicable to Canadian-controlled private corporations, for example. But otherwise, relating to all those tax measures, unless there's a specific mention that it's not open to non-residents, it should be available. But I can speak for banks, for example, or other institutions that may have different views around that, or may have different policies and internal policies that could address that situation. Jason, I don't know if you have any specific information on that, more than that.
No, I don't, and I agree with your response there. It depends if the company is considered a Canadian-controlled private corporation for tax purposes or not. For most of these programs, and that would depend on the facts of each individual situation. I guess it's questionable whether these people or individuals are indeed residents for tax purposes as well, right? When you say they're temporary, I don't know what temporary means. Temporary can mean 1 year, can mean 4 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a question here, which I think is probably pertains to quite a few businesses out there. So they may not have seen an immediate impact over the last 2 weeks, for example, and a lot of businesses did, but going forward, they might see the pipeline of their workload diminishing. And without knowing, whether we're in this situation for 60 days, for 90 days? I mean, it does seem that there's some indications from both the BC government and the federal government that this could be a prolonged period. So how do those kinds of companies access support, knowing that they are seeing a decline in revenue coming up, let's say in the month of, later in April or in the month of May? Jason, maybe I'll get you to address that, or what other kinds of programs are out there to support businesses in that situation?
First thing I can think of is the $40,000 loan that we talked about earlier. That interest-free loan that's definitely available to all companies, or sorry, all small companies, small businesses. And then you got the wage subsidy that's available to all corporations. That's accessible to most of these companies as well. If the revenue is shrinking rapidly, I suspect they'll probably qualify for the 30% decrease in revenues. So they should qualify for that program as well. And in terms of other support, I guess it would depend on what industry they're in. But in terms of other programs at this point, I can't think of any other ones. There's like Daniel mentioned, there's the SR&ED credit programs, tax credit programs. There's the IRAP, Industrial Research Assistance Program. There's other industry specific grants out there too. So it depends on what industry you're in and what you're doing.
Okay, great. And we've got another question on the drop in revenue, and we've addressed that. So it is calculated year over year. So March 2019 to March 2020, April and May. So month by month, and need to apply for it each month to show a 30% drop in revenue year over year per month. So I'm going to go to that second question there about temporary layoffs. Should not exceed 13 weeks in the 20-week period, and this is under the Employment Standards Act, I believe, in British Columbia. So, and given that we don't know how long the COVID-19 crisis might last, what about having to pay severance? Do we have any guidelines on that at this point? This is something that I know a lot of members have been speaking out about through the Board of Trade, and we've been speaking to the provincial government about it. But do you have any guidance on that, Jason?
No, actually, I don't have a whole lot of guidance on this topic. Julian, Daniel, do you guys have any knowledge?
This is a question that's specific to the Employment Standards Act, where we have been speaking to government about it, that, looking for some guidance about layoffs and whether that, this is going to be a forced layoff or whether this is going to be a termination. So perhaps we'll leave that question. We'll go to another question, because it is something that we've been speaking to the government about and asking for some clear guidance on that as well. Going back,
I know that some at least one other province made some changes to their employment to allow that. So that's something for provincial law, provincial statutes. So that may be something that will be considered with seriously.
I believe it was Ontario.
Yeah, I think it is.
The other thing, this doesn't directly answer the question, but there is that Canadian Emergency Response Benefit Program, which offers $2,000 a month. That could be applied for immediately, and that's in addition to normal EI benefits. So that could help weather the storm for the next 4 months.
So I think that's the question there, second, that we could see on the screen. So who gets that $2,000 a month? What is the criteria for that?
So it's very broad. It's almost anybody who's directly impacted by COVID-19. Whether you're laid off because of COVID-19, whether you need to stay at home and be quarantined because you may have COVID-19, or you have to take care of family members that have COVID-19. So it's very broad. So essentially anybody who's affected by it that's been laid off.
Great, okay. We've got time maybe for another 1 or 2 questions. So I'm just going to maybe zip down to near the bottom there. What if an individual or business does not have an ideal credit score? Can they still apply? Is a credit score actually going to be part of the criteria? I haven't seen any guidelines around that, recognizing that some of these guidelines are still coming out as we speak. Jason, do you have any, have you heard anything today about whether a credit score is part of it?
No, but based on what I'm seeing coming out of the government, they're going to be backing all the loans. So as far as I know, there's no real mention about having a good credit score or actually even reviewing a credit score. So based on what I've seen, I don't think that's going to come into play.
Okay, and maybe what I'll do is I'll wrap up here because we're just about out of time. And if you have any final thoughts, and maybe I'll just, in my screen anyway, I can see all of the videos or all of your screens one after another. Maybe Daniel, I'll start with you with some final thoughts for viewers out there about access to government funding.
I'd say that, well, it's something that there are so many announcements, as we mentioned earlier, to make sure that you you look at you review your plan of action every day. Okay, every day look at what are your priorities, and look if there's something that was announced. What are the because it changed so much in the last 2 weeks. So that's something that should be done constantly. Just stay informed to make sure that you can adjust your strategy as we go on through this crisis. That may be my first recommendation, and try to accelerate everything you can get into government hands for tax credits, for example. All those tax credit claims, get them as fast as possible in the hands of the government in order to get that cash back as soon as possible.
Recognizing it is a very fluid situation, you're correct on that. Julien, any final thoughts?
I think that given the current situation, it's often tempting to look at the Brexit news and just to find a first grant, for example, to apply to if you're eligible to. But maybe there's a better strategy, and taking more time to really understand which are the programs to which you are eligible. Maybe it's two other. One for the capex and the other one for the wages that could give a better benefit than the first one that you thought about. And there's so many openness from the different administrative organizations that are managing these programs that you can also discuss this with them. Of course, they are lacking of time, but there's an open discussion that can be given. So think about having a real strategy and not just jumping on the first program to which you are eligible.
And I'll give the final word to you, Jason, and perhaps you can also address the need for people to be applying as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you need to apply as soon as possible because you don't know how long the government's actually going to open these applications for. And it's not, I'm not saying the government will do it, but they could, kind of overspend and then realize that they're overspending, and then they may start cutting back on certain incentives. So that is a possibility. So get your application in earlier than later. Apply for as many programs as you can. As Daniel and Julien mentioned, there's lots of programs out there. There were tons of programs available even before the COVID-19, so you should try and take advantage of those programs as well. And just kind of keep up to date on what's happening, because there's, as Bridget mentioned, this is very fluid. There's announcements coming out every day. And for all we know, there could be another program coming out later this week.
Yeah, it certainly is fluid, and I know that government is really looking at how these measures are impacting businesses and if there's other gaps that need to be addressed. So absolutely apply early and also see if there's other measures that need to be put in place. Jason and Julien and Daniel, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And you can watch this webinar again. Thank you. Thanks very much. You can watch this webinar again. Please visit theboardoftrade.com and you will be able to see it there. And we want to continue this important conversation and stay connected. So we are going to be hosting a series of free webinars on navigating COVID-19. Tomorrow, we will have the Honorable Melanie Joly, the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, join us for a webinar. And over the next few days, we'll be bringing together experts to speak on a variety of topics, including adaptive leadership and contract performance. We have also created a business resource page that is designed to provide planning toolkits and information to businesses, including up-to-date information on guidelines and measures introduced by levels of government. And so as that information becomes available, we continually update that page. So Please go to that page for the latest information. Thank you to everyone for being part of today's webinar. We look forward to connecting again soon. And to echo the words of Dr. Bonnie Henry, our Provincial Medical Health Officer, be kind, be calm, and be safe.